Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the keynote address of Niti-Samvaad 2018. It is with extreme pleasure that I present our keynote speaker, Mr. P. Sainath. Mr. P. Sainath is the former rural editor of The Hindu. He is the winner of the Magsaysay Award in 2007 for Journalism, Literature and Creative Communications Arts. He was the first reporter in the world to win Amnesty International's Global Human Rights Journalism Prize in his inaugural year in 2000. The two documentary films on his work, Nero's Guess and A Tribe of His Own, have between them picked up over 20 awards across the globe. Mr. Sainath's book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, has remained a non-fiction bestseller by an Indian author for years and was declared a Penguin Classic in 2012. His latest project, The People's Archive of Rural India, launched on December 20, 2014. It aims at capturing the everyday lives of everyday people, their labor, languages, livelihoods, arts, crafts, and other aspects of rural India. This is a platform that combines video, audio, still photography, and print with free and open access for everyone. Before we begin the session, a few guidelines for the audience. I request the audience members to please keep their phones on silent. Questions will be taken through chits. If you have a question, our volunteers will be around with pens and paper. And now, without further ado, Mr. P. Sainath.
Morning. I love your theme topic. It's very appropriate and very good. Protest politics and policies. Absolutely every one of the major crises that we face, crises in terms of whether the agrarian, the ecological, the intellectual, or education. For the educational crisis is also a very real and severe one. Every one of these crises is rooted in policy. It's not the whims of individuals. Sometimes they are policy driven. Sometimes it's a fact that the crisis may appear to you to be moron driven. And they are, but the morons also have their roots in policy. I mean, a very quick, actually I believe the greatest of our crises is inequality, which has grown faster in India than in any other comparable nation in the last 20 years. But a quick look at what I meant by the educational and the fact that sometimes something seems to be moron driven. And unfortunately, we are getting too polite in our discourse not to overlook and not discuss some things or take them up. But I'm sure all of you were entertained by the Minister Satyapal Singh's discoveries about Darwin. Now, Mr. Satyapal Singh, a former police commissioner, who declares himself a man of science, said that he found Darwin's theories worthless primarily, and his case rested on one particular irrefutable piece of evidence. He says Darwin's theory of evolution is all nonsense because no one of us has ever actually seen an ape turn into a man. Has anyone gone into the jungle, he asks, and has seen an ape turn into a man? No. Therefore, the theory of evolution, or Darwin's theory of evolution, is all nonsense. Now, I grant that he is irrefutably right on one thing. None of us has actually seen an ape turn into a man. But I think we are privileged in our time to witness ministers of the government attempt the reverse process with some degree of success. So, understand this. The crowd now in power probably take education and education policy more seriously than any government in the history of India has done on an ideological basis. Okay? That's why the continuing systematic attacks on institution after institution connected to education. Yeah. Look, just which institution has, and the trouble is, the tragedy is, they are bankrupt in the personnel they have. They don't have the people to staff the institutions they want to reform because they really have a bunch of morons. Now you take Tagore's university. Yeah? Rabindranath Tagore started his university. He didn't start it in Jadavpur or Kolkata. He started it in a solid Adivasi area. That time, heavily covered by forest and jungle. That's where he started Vishwa Bharati. He wanted a university, its knowledge, its facilities to be available to the Adivasis of the Bolpur area, of Birbhum and Bolpur. And the university itself was structured in a way that for decades it interacted with 40, 60 villages around it. Now you know what's happening there? You had an acting vice chancellor, desperate to be made vice chancellor. So with earlier governments, people desperate to get an appointment would have done other sorts of things, But in our present time, what does the acting vice chancellor do in order to draw attention to his candidacy for vice chancellor? In Tagore's Temple of Learning, he starts a Gaushala with 200 cows and says that he is realizing Tagore's dream. There are already 40 cows. Tagore never had any dream of a Gaushala. He, in the 1930s and 1930s, understand this, the distance between Shantiniketan and Kolkata is today 4 hours, 4.5 hours by road. In those days it was 8 hours, 10 hours or more. He had, and you couldn't get, there was no mother dairy or Amul milk cooperative and no refrigeration. Because he had a primary school on campus, he grudgingly permitted the existence of 6 cows to feed the little children in the primary school. Now you're having a Gaushala with 200. You have a vice chancellor of JNU who wants to station a tank on the campus, a battle tank. Yeah. You had a series of walking disasters and appointments in one university after the other. We get lost in the individual, right? And often the individual is compelling, like the clown they first put in charge of the Film and Television Institute of India. Yeah. Yudhishthira. Now, whose other activity apart from playing Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata was, skin flicks. Yeah. So, that was his claim. Actually, if anybody ever read the Mahabharata properly, and I generally find that those who swear by the epics haven't read them. Yudhishthira was a character whose honesty and truth-telling was so great that his chariot never touched the ground. It always floated 6 inches above the ground until the day he told a lie about Aswatthama is dead, and then his chariot descended to earth. Now this was connected to his truthfulness. It's curious to me that the truthfulness was so important and that he was such a paragon of virtue on that basis, because he was also a gambler, an alcoholic, a person who gambled away his wife. All that didn't really matter. He told the truth. So you get that Yudhishthira's chariot touched the ground. This one never took off. Right? And after a few months, they withdrew him to replace him with, I don't know how to describe this character. It's an endless stream of what goes on. Point is, all these moves come from a clear view of what education must be and what you must be made by that education, what you must become as a result of that education. In the history of the Indian Science Congress, we have never had a situation where a paper was presented 2 years ago on Pushpak Vimanam in ancient India. Tens of thousands of years ago, we had aircraft. There are even elaborate diagrams of the aircraft. And the peculiar distinction of that aircraft was that it could even fly backwards. Yeah? And this is presented at the Indian Science Congress. It's presented at the Indian Science Congress. Right? Leading to your Nobel Prize winner, Venki, saying that he would never again attend an Indian Science Congress. The Indian History Congress was considered irredeemable, so they just thrown it out, cut its funding, and it had to occur in West Bengal because though one state government was willing to give it some funds to hold. We have a Prime Minister who at the inaugural of the Reliance Health Foundation, Vagera, told the nation from the premises of a modern corporate health facility that India knew plastic surgery in the time of Lord Ganesh. And the very existence of an elephant head on Ganesh shows you that we knew plastic surgery. And of course, we knew stem cell and genetic engineering in the time of Lord Karna. Man, this stuff is actually being put into the textbooks. Yeah. This stuff is getting into the textbooks. Even your kid brothers and sisters in school are being fed this sort of stuff. Imagine you are seeing the education and learning process being set back by 50 to 100 years. It's driven by policy. But let's get back to what I said is the major crisis, which is rooted entirely in policy, in which many of these other crises fit in, whether the agrarian, the intellectual, the ecological, or whatever. But just one little snippet on the environment and ecological. The discussion over air pollution in Delhi, if you remember, in November was largely centered around the burning of paddy stubble in Punjab. That happened for all of 8 days. Yeah. There's another 357 days when Delhi shows similar levels of pollution. But you don't discuss that. And you don't discuss it because so much of the air pollution is the result of a policy driven from 20 years, not just this government, more than for almost 25 years, of a giant expansion of the private automobile sector. Okay? Do you know that the city of Mumbai, between 2012 and 2017, added 550 new vehicles every day? Sumit Sen's report in the Times of India shows you that. 1 million plus vehicles in 5 years. You do the math. Over 1 million vehicles in 5 years. You divide that by 12 and by 365, you get 547.9. And you will, but it's over 1 million. So you can round that off safely at 550 vehicles a day. And by the way, that's not the peak in Mumbai. At the time when automobiles were being pushed in the budget, when taxes were being raised on food products, but lowered on air conditioners and automobiles, you had a gigantic expansion of a sector based on fossil fuels entirely. Imagine if you have 550 vehicles every day on your city streets, then you are an idiot to have a discussion on pollution without factoring that in. Am I right? We'd be morons not to factor that in any discussion we have on pollution. But where have you seen the pollution debate linked to the fact of a gigantic policy-driven, huge, for private automobiles, not for public transport, which would cut pollution massively and create jobs? I live near the Leelavati hospital in the Bandra reclamation. The bus depot is next to me, the reclamation bus depot. If I get onto the bus and came here to Xavier's or wherever I did, by the time the bus reaches here, 200 people have used it. By the time it comes here, 200 people minimum have gotten on and off in Mumbai, at peak hours more. So, but if I were a single driven car, I was driving my own car, owner driven car, and came here, same units of fossil fuel, one person, 200 people. Where are those debates on public transportation? Where are those discussions on why the heck have we given billions of rupees in concessions to the automobile industry when all over the world, there is a discussion on fossil fuels, which will increasingly become scarce, on how air pollution is affected by that. I give you one example just one example from the state of Maharashtra of how the productive versus the non-productive, the luxury automobile was boosted and corseted and coddled by state policy. Most of you would be too young. In 2010, your faculty members may have seen the thing on TV. Aurangabad entered the Limca Book of Records and applied for an entry in the Guinness Book because it held a fair at Mela where at a single stroke 150 Mercedes-Benz were sold. Any of you guys remember that? Avnish, you remember that? It's in the Limca book. 150 Mercedes-Benz were sold in the town of Aurangabad. And I remember the mayor or deputy mayor saying that we have put Aurangabad on the map. Pardon me, I thought it was always there. Especially as a transit point to Ajanta and Ellora. Right? But they put it on the map. Now, what happened In the same Aurangabad district, an hour's drive away, an hour and a half drive away, a woman farmer, Hirabai Rathod, in the same period, bought a tractor. She bought a tractor and went into bankruptcy over it. She is past 60, Hirabai. She is an Adivasi and a farmer. The 150 Mercedes Benz, how did so many people in Aurangabad afford them? Well, Aurangabad has rich people, but please know this. Marathwada's per capita income is less than half of that of Mumbai's. Marathwada's per capita income is less than half of that of Mumbai Coke. The Mercedes Benz were purchased because the State Bank of India gave them the lowest interest rate on the loan to purchase the Mercedes Benz. You know what was guys, what is the educational loan if some of you are planning to go abroad? What is the percentage on the educational loan now? 14%. I guess you'd really have to ask your parents, but they're the ones who are going to shell out, right? So the 14%, do you know what the interest rate for the... First of all, the total cost of these Mercedes-Benz was some 166 lakhs. Because there are various categories. I believe even in Mercedes-Benz there is a luxury deluxe category and an Aam Aadmi category. But anyway, there are different categories in it. Out of the 166 lakhs, sorry, what am I saying? I'm saying 166 lakhs. It was a hell of a lot more than that. But whatever the amount was, two-thirds, more than about two-thirds of that loan, if I'm not mistaken, was two-thirds of the total amount was covered by a State Bank of India loan at 7% interest. 7% interest to buy a luxury good called the Mercedes Benz. Hirabai Rathod bought her tractor at 16% interest, also State Bank loan. Yeah? 16% interest for a productive thing called a tractor, 7% interest for a rich guy buying, sorry girls, it was all guys, for a rich guy buying a Mercedes Benz. Yeah. In fact, the state significantly subsidized the purchase of the Mercedes Benz. You will remember that well, you won't remember, but your faculty will. There's a period from 2003 to 2008 where, from 98 to 2006 or so you could say, where automobile companies were offering free test drive, keep the vehicle for 3 months, that sort of a thing. All this was subsidized by you and me. It was subsidized with public money, with tax money, with the revenue of the state government of India. That's how it was subsidized. So you lead this unbelievable expansion. Do you know that I said in 5 years, Mumbai added 1 million vehicles. Between 81 and 91, from 81 to 2001, it took 20 years, almost 15 to 20 years, for Mumbai to add 1 million vehicles. From 2001 to 2011, it took just 10 years to add the next 1 million vehicles. 2012 to 2017, it took just 5 years to add the next 1 million vehicles. Now they anticipate that the next million could be added in 3 years or less. I don't know about how you guys see that, but I think that I want to defend my lungs. And so do you. Yeah. The point I'm trying to make to you is not that there was this sudden binge buying of Mercedes-Benz and private automobiles. There was a solid push by the state to get you into consumer spending on private automobiles. That adds to GDP growth. Almost anything adds to GDP growth. War adds to GDP growth. It will double your GDP growth. This whole notion, this whole way of thinking. Let me tell you something. Let's do this thing. What is this auditorium called? College. Okay. Now, when you built this auditorium, you added to the GDP, right? Did you not? Yeah. If you demolish this auditorium, you're adding to the GDP. It's the aggregate of all economic activity. So let's demolish the auditorium, your materials, labor, energy, spending. The demolition of your auditorium adds to the GDP. Then you rebuild it, it adds to the GDP. Then you demolish it once again, it adds to the GDP. Yeah? The fastest growing economy in 2003 was Afghanistan. Do you know why? Because in 2002, the Americans bombed everything into the Stone Age. So if you added 10 kilometers of railway and 2 hospitals, you doubled the GDP of Afghanistan. Think, goddammit. Use your minds, use your brains. These are silly, stupid, sterile measures of trying to understand the world. They have a use, they have a meaning in a context, and usually in a very narrow context. Don't try understanding the well-being of 1.3 billion people through that number. So I'm showing you that then the destruction of thousands of acres of forest land given over to corporations, where even the ecological, where even the environmental impact assessments have been scrapped in a large number of cases, that has an effect on your environment. The only point I'm making to you is all of it, none of this happened out of natural calamity. It happened when somebody, some interest, some class group in command, in power, devised a policy. And that policy drove the entire thing forward. I was saying that in no country in the world did inequality grow as fast as it did. There are countries more unequal than India. Russia, as of today, in income and wealth inequality is greater than that of India. But India has other inequalities, social hierarchy inequalities, that the Russians can't begin to imagine. The inequalities of caste. And the very extreme triple burden inequalities of caste, class and gender, which say Dalit women suffer. Okay? Anyway, let's look at income and wealth. As you know, Piketty and company have already shown you the income inequalities. I want to talk to you on something about the wealth. Every year, the giant multinational, the poverty figures are now so bastardized that I think it makes more sense to look at the wealth figures. Because those, the government does not conceal. They're quite proud of them. Right? I mean, the ruling elites are very proud of the wealth generation. So they don't, it's the poverty figures that get the hatchet. The multinational bank called Credit Suisse, heard of it? Yeah, you have. Puts out a global wealth data book each year. The global wealth data book gives you something very interesting. it gives you the wealth, household wealth, total household wealth of a select group of nations. India figures there. It gives you the total household wealth decile-wise. Do you know what decile-wise is? Okay. People try understanding numbers by dividing their subject into tens, into group 10% or whatever, in tenths. So the bottom 10, in this case, the bottom 10% of Indian society would be the 10th decile or the bottom decile. You can call it first decile or bottom decile, but it's the bottom decile. And they show you the decile-wise wealth. They show you what the top 10% own, what the top 5% own, and what the top 1% own. The top 1% in 2016 in this country owned 58.4% of all household wealth in this country. The top 1%. The top 10%, over 86%. Right? And how does that compare with the quintessential capitalist market economy called the United States? In United States, the top 1% own 42.1%, as against India's 58.4%. I'm told the 2017 report has revised its methodology, so India's figure comes down lower, but so does the United States. We are still way ahead of the United States. Our top 1% controls a far greater share of wealth in our society than the American 1% does. And you're talking about an America which is more unequal than America has ever been since the Great Depression. If you really think about it, you'll understand it in other ways. That an Indian millionaire is much richer than an American millionaire because of the cost of labor, for instance. Your Indian millionaire can have 6, 7, 10 domestic servants. Right? Or put it this way, an American millionaire is someone who could put 3 kids through college without knowing it. An Indian millionaire is somebody who could own 3 colleges without knowing it. We have a former education minister in this state, Patangrao Kadam. I once did a story on him where he had gloriously taken a photo of himself with a halo and fanad. And the halo consisted of the names of the 55 educational institutions he owned in 1989. Imagine. I bet you he has no clue how many he owns right now. So you have now this, you can say India always had inequality. There was great inequality over the centuries. So what's different? This is different. In the last 25 years, never in our history, and certainly in our history as an independent nation, has inequality been constructed so cynically, engineered so ruthlessly, and justified so hypocritically in terms of the rich get richer, there's going to be a trickle down. I love this trickle down theory. It means that if we're all having lunch, all the food has to be on my table. And since my table can't fit all the lunch, some crumbs are going to fall off, and what you get to eat, that's trickle down. Wealth going downwards. So, never in our history has it been so cynically constructed, so ruthlessly engineered. Give you the numbers on this. Again, numbers give you trends. They don't give you an understanding of the world, but they show you something. They illuminate a process. In 1991, when we began the supposed or called reforms process, there was not a single dollar billionaire in India. Or if there was, they were very modest about it. So they were never counted. I think the first of your dollar billionaires came around 1995. in the Forbes billionaires list. Have you heard of Forbes? Forbes billionaires list. By the way, you know when Forbes publishes its list, usually on March 8th, International Women's Day. I have no idea why. And there are very few women in the list, obviously. But maybe it's an aspirational. Yeah. So in 91, 0. 95, I think there was one. Then Forbes starts its list. In year 2000, there were 9 Indian dollar billionaires. In year 2012, there were 55 dollar billionaires. In 2017, Forbes logged 101 dollar billionaires, ranking 4th in the world in dollar billionaires. And the same nation that ranks 4th in the world in dollar billionaires ranks 131st in the United Nations Human Development Index. Okay? 4th in dollar billionaires, 131st in the Human Development Index of the United Nations. 4th in the dollar billionaires and 100th out of 119 nations in the Global Hunger Index, put out by International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington. You are 100. Rwanda handles its hunger better than you do. It's above you in many years. Yeah. There are many nations which handle its hunger. You look at the health index. You are below. I think Bangladesh has overtaken you there. At the level of affluence, you are in number 1, number 2, number 3 on almost everything. In the indexes of deprivation, you're down there at the bottom. That's inequality. And it was achieved in a period of 20 years. In fact, it grew dramatically in 16 years between 2000 and 2016. I take that period because we have the Credit Suisse data for that period. By the way, all this data is accessible to you. You can always download it and look at it. It's called Global Wealth Data Book, 2016, Credit Suisse. Have a look. I'll save you the problem of searching. The tables are on 148 and 149 pages. 148 and 149. While the top 1% owned 58.4%, what did the bottom 10% own? In 2016, minus 0.7%. The bottom 10% owned, how do you want a minus? It's when your liabilities are running far ahead of your assets. Right? It means you're up to your nose in debt. And that's the time when you don't want to open your mouth. Right? The second 10% owned plus 0.2%. The third decile owned, these figures will change from year to year, but the third decile owned plus 0.5%. Now guys, all you bright young people here, minus 0.7 plus 0.2 plus 0.5, it means the bottom 30% own. What does the bottom 30% own? Come on. Nothing. It owns zilch. Minus 0.7 nullifies plus 0.7, plus 0.2, plus 0.5. It means effectively the bottom 30% of Indian society own nothing. Whereas the richest Indian in the 2015 count, using Forbes, a young economist, Srujana Bodapatti, working in Delhi, calculated the net worth of each of those dollar billionaires and found that the richest Indian owned 0.55%. It means that that one individual, no prizes for guessing, owned more than your bottom 40%. In terms of household wealth. We're not talking about income here. We're talking about household wealth. Total household wealth. Owned more than for the bottom. How many? 500 million people? 400 million people? 40%. 450 million people? Whatever, you do the math. So these are the kind of... No society can ever sustain those kind of gaps and things. Okay? Now let's look at that bottom 30%. We have data from the government of India that allows us a glimpse of what's going on with them. At the same year that we found that we had 53 billionaires, we started what came to be known as the Socio-Economic Caste Census. Have you heard of it? The SECC? Have you guys heard of it? You need to hear of it. You need to go up and read about it. You can download a lot of the material of what the government chose to put out. It did not put out the caste data. It put out the census data. It put out the socio-economic data. 75% of rural households in India, the main breadwinner takes home less than 5,000 rupees a month. 5,000 rupees a month or lower. 75% of rural households, and rural India constitutes 69% of your population. Okay? Now, if you raise the bar from 5,000 to 10,000, it becomes 90% of rural households, the main breadwinner takes home less than 10,000 rupees. How many households in rural India does the main breadwinner take home more than 10,000 rupees? 8%. But if you adjust that 8% for Dalits and Adivasis, it falls to less than 4%. For scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, less than 4% of rural households. And who are those 4%? They are mostly people employed by government services. Your postman, your primary school teacher, right? Your railway worker, bank employee. These are usually the people who will earn more than 10,000. And just 4% of such households in rural India. In scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, 8% is a kind of national average. Right? So you have such a situation. What about farmers? What do they earn? The last data we have from the National Sample Survey Organization, your largest data collection agency, Situational Assessment Survey of Farm Households in India 2013 tells us, anyone would like to guess, this is not an individual income, it is household monthly income, which means 5 people. Would you like to guess, what does a farm household in India, 5-member household, earn monthly, the average figure across this nation? You know, guys, in your policies, protests, and politics and stuff, always have your discussions, your panels, your debates linked to the lives of real people. Don't abstract these principles. Yeah. Behind those words are 1.3 billion human beings. Don't abstract the principle and discuss it. I asked you to guess again. Average farm household in India, income not from farming, income from all sources. By the way, most farms in this country and across the world, the greater share of their income comes from non-farm activity. So what is the average income of an Indian farm household? 5 members. Guess? I guess that would be correct for maybe Bihar or UP. 6,426 rupees is the national average, which is an average of Kerala and Punjab on the one hand and Chhattisgarh and Odisha on the other hand. Right? And please remember that brings it to a per capita income of under 1,300 rupees a month. Not 4,500. 1,300 rupees a month is the per capita income of that household. Yeah. But gee, we got $101 millionaires, right? I mean, we're the best. We are fourth in the world in that. You got $101 billionaires. There is a total visible link, if you want to see it, between the super affluence of the few, yeah, and the distress and misery of the many. The agrarian crisis, as we call it. What is an agrarian crisis? How is it different from a crisis in agriculture? How is it different from a crisis in agriculture? An agrarian crisis is much wider than a crisis in farming alone. An agrarian crisis is where every sector of rural society that is in some way impinging where agriculture is the center, but the person may not be a farmer, may not have anything to do with farming directly. All of them, your carpenters, your inland fishermen, your tailors, your weavers, they're all part of this agrarian society. Know this, when farmers go bankrupt, anywhere in the south for instance, carpenters starve to death. Because the nature of the carpenter in the Indian village, the mistri, in every village there will be one or two mistri families, carpenter families. They are dependent on the farmer. They are not farmers. They've never done any farming. They don't own any land. But they are agrarian. They're part of agrarian society. Do you understand? Now, they get 70% of their income in kind. Yeah, I'm the carpenter, Avanish is the farmer. He gives me so many kilograms of rice, so many kilograms of vegetables in a year, and a little cash. Now, when all farmers in the village are in distress, not a single farmer orders a new bullock cart, not a single farmer wants a new yoke, not a single farmer wants a new plow, not a single farmer even gives him existing tools for retooling. Now what happens to him? He starves. We found this correlation between farmer bankruptcies and starvation deaths of the carpenter across Rayalaseema, coastal Andhra and Telangana. The famous case in the media being that of Bangaru Ramachandravu in Nalagonda district of now what is Telangana. Now in Rayalaseema, for instance, when the farmers went bankrupt, you know who went completely berserk? Weavers. Why? Farmers and agricultural laborers are the first market of the weavers. Right? They weave that soft white cloth for the sun. They weave those clothes that the farmer and the agricultural labor use. The towels, the dhotis, the head towels, whatever it is. So when the farmer can't buy, the weaver is finished. So weaving collapses in all these areas. Agrarian crisis is something much larger than just the farmer or the farming. It affects the core of society across the countryside. Second, 20 years, the 1995 you get your first billionaire, 2015 you have nearly 100, 2000, okay? Or 2017 you have 101. In the same period of 1995 to 2015, The National Crime Records Bureau tells us that over 310,000 farmers in this country committed suicide. The suicides are not the agrarian crisis. They are just a manifestation of it. They're the most tragic phase, they're not the crisis. The crisis is something else. The loss of production is not the crisis. The number of people who died is not the crisis. The suicides are the most tragic and human part of it. The greatest human tragedy ever we've had in independent India. But they are not the origin of the crisis, only its outcome. They are not the cause of a crisis, they are its consequence. This year I'll be entering the 20th year that I've been covering this crisis, and my own thinking on it has evolved along particular lines. For me, it's no longer a measure. It's no longer just a measure, only a measure of how many lives have been lost. It's no longer a measure just of how much productivity has been lost. It's also a measure of how much of our humanity has been lost. It's a measure of the shrinking boundaries of our humanity and our humaneness. That for 20 years, we have sat by and watched this happen. If we were completely aghast and appalled by it, it shouldn't be happening. But it's happened, it continues to happen, and it's business as usual, life goes on as usual. This is a crisis. If any crisis was started with policy, this one did. Two sets of policies. One set of policies in the late 60s, which carried over into negative effects in the 80s, and from the liberalization period, a set of policies that devastated the Indian farmer. Now, all of you have been reading how the media have been projecting this latest budget, right, as pro-farmer. MSP is going to be cost of production plus 50%. Wow. Do you believe it? I believe it. But you know what they're doing? Do you understand how they are constructing these numbers? That's why, don't try understanding the world through numbers. Understand the numbers. Then try understanding the world. What they've done, one of the greatest demands of farmers across the country, the number one demand is, and you find it reflected in the first recommendation of the MS Swaminathan Commission, that is the National Farmers Commission report. You find that reflected there, which is the minimum support price should be cost of production plus 50% guaranteed above the cost of production. That would be, and there is unanimity on this and no one has opposed it. The government this government today in power came to power putting that promise in their manifesto. In their manifesto they wrote, we will implement Swaminathan Commission's MSP plus 50%, that for demand of the farmers they called it, and they said we will implement it. That was 2014. 2015, after they come to power, they submit an affidavit to the court saying this is unrealistic, it cannot be done, it would lead to distortions of the market. In less than 12 months after coming to power, they file affidavits. Then again in 2016, they say that in 2016, the Radha Mohan Singh, the agriculture minister, says, we never made this promise. In 2017, they reiterate that they have made the promise and they will implement it. And in 2018, Mr. Jaitley, in paragraphs 13 and 14 of the budget speech, says what? We've already implemented it. So all those farmers on the streets protesting, they're morons who don't know that their major demand has already been met and implemented. What have they done? The trick lies in understanding what is cost of production. And that's a policy decision, what you include in the cost of production. There are three. One is called A2. Cost of production in terms of am I confusing you? Okay. I will, but and you can, when I do, you tell me about it. A2 simply means the immediate paid out amounts by the farmer for, say, seed, pesticide, fertilizer, water, whatever. I mean, that sort of a thing. Okay? The immediate paid out cost, the input costs. Then there is a category of cost of production called A2 plus FL, which is A2 plus family labor. Because people are putting their labor into the farm. If they were putting it somewhere else, they'd be earning some cash rupees if they found the employment. And that is factored into it. It's called A2 plus FL. The real cost of production is called C2. C2 is the comprehensive cost to the farmer. And tell me, does every private enterprise in the world, does it or does it not count the rental value of land? Does it or does it not count your interest payments on your interest on working capital? Does every enterprise in the world do this? But farmers shouldn't. If you calculate that, you get C2. You get C2. How? Let me give you an example. Take wheat, gehu. The A2 cost of wheat is 797 rupees per quintal. The A2 plus family labor cost of wheat is 1203 rupees. I'm sorry, I am confusing you. The A2 plus FL cost, A2 plus family labor cost of wheat is 797 rupees. The C2 cost is 1203 rupees, which means that your MSP has to be 1804 rupees. Clear on the math? 1203 plus 50% is 1804. And what is the MSP of wheat? 1600. 1620. What are they doing? They are taking A2 and A2FL as cost of production, which was what the Swaminathan Commission never did. It never did that. It clearly speaks of C2. COP2, cost of production 2 plus 50%. So by just lying our heads off, deluding ourselves, we think that we are solving this problem. I was in Chandigarh where people from the Niti-Samvaad and others came, and all sorts of reasoning from learned people on what are the reasons for the distress. One says it's the spending pattern. These farmers, they're going and spending and buying SUVs. If every SUV in this country was owned by a farmer, it would not account for 1% of the farm population. But never mind. So there are these things. It's their spending pattern. I've heard this in Maharashtra, where a journalist, very senior one, told me, "Ye sab bevda hai sir. They're drunkards. They drink and then they kill themselves." And mind you, this is a journalist who lives in Vidarbha. That's why I said it's a measure of our loss of humanity, not of loss of production alone. By the way, If alcohol was the major reason for suicide, damn it, there'd be no journalists left in the world. And very few academics. And no human rights activists at all. Right? So let's not get moralistic about this shit, okay? And so you had this crisis, the Agrarian Crisis, on such terms where entirely a set of policies in credit, policies in universities. You know, in the 60s, 70s, the agricultural colleges which were opened at that time served the community. They had a strong bond to the community. Today, they serve as branch plant economies and research laboratories for Monsanto, for Rasi Seeds, for a bunch of corporations. The syndicates of these universities, the largest seed and input sellers in the states, are heading the syndicates of Andhra University in agriculture. Let me tell you a very cute fact about agriculture colleges in Maharashtra. They are full, they are packed with young people like you. Not even a single one of them is likely to go into agriculture. Why are the agricultural colleges packed? Because the cutoff point is very low, the fees is very cheap, and you can position yourself there and study for the competitives, for UPSC. Okay, it's a good place to be for 3 years, paying a low fee, easy to get in, cutoff point is much lower, and then I can get my Kunji books and prepare for UPSC and state administrative exams and everything else. So the colleges are full. So if we took, that's why I said, understand the numbers before you try understanding the world with the numbers. By the numbers in the agricultural colleges, wow, agriculture is booming. Everybody wants it. The reality of those numbers, I've come to the conclusion that the worst people to tell you about numbers are the economists. They know all the numbers. They get all the numbers. They're perfect with the numbers. They don't understand a damn thing. I'm talking about mainstream neoliberal economists. The ones who are running your country. Who are out there defending demonetization and telling you how it actually had a very good impact. You know, on the anniversary of demonetization, I was in a small town called Chitradurga in rural Karnataka. It's famous for 3 things, okay? I mean, for all the religious mathas that are there from the time of Basava. It's famous for the Chitradurga 16th century fortress. And it's famous for the Lalita Bhavan tiffin home, which gives you dosas to kill for. I, of course, gravitated towards the tiffin home for the dosas. All over the Lalita Bhavan tiffin home were notices in Kannada, same notice. I asked for a translation. It said, please do not bring 2,000 rupee notes to this establishment. Either you tender exact change or you bring smaller denomination notes. So I asked the owner manager, why are you still having these notices? It's been a year. Essentially his reply was, let it be, no, who knows what they'll do next. And you have all these wise guys sitting there telling you actually it was very good. Understand the war on black money. Less than 3% of currency was black money. Black money was mainly and is mainly held in real estate, in gold, diamonds and jewelry, and in illicit accounts overseas. Remember, Mr. Modi promised to get you back 15 lakh rupees per Indian. Yeah. I had doubts from a year ago whether he meant he would take 15 lakhs from each Indian or bring it in. Then you had You know, what is the black money? The former Reserve Bank of India governor, Mr. Y.V. Reddy, so beautifully explained 1 month before the demonetization, saying this is the stupidest idea ever. He didn't know that they were going to implement it. You know, he didn't know. He thought that nothing like that can ever happen again, because the last 2 times it happened. But there's a nice Chinese saying, when there is nothing left to do, be sure a fool will do it. So anyway, they did it. In his speech called the Mahesh Buch Memorial Lecture, he says, all cash is fungible, all money is fungible. A builder has a lot of black money, correct? So the builder has black money and he pays his laborers with that money. He pays them cash. In the hands of that laborer, that money is pure white money. He's not evaded taxes. He is not cheated anyone anywhere. He has not cheated the exchequer. In his hands or her hands, that money is purely white money. In the evening, the agriculture, those laborers go to the dukan, to the kirana dukan, and buy their provisions. And they pay the dukandar with that money. In the night, the dukandar pays the hafta and the bribes to the police, to the municipality, and it's black money. In 24 hours, that money was black, white, black. You get it? Modi didn't. The RBI governor did. Mr. Reddy did. That's the point again and again and again. Did any of these happen by calamity? Did any of these happen as an accident? They happened by conscious policy. If you don't study the policy idea, you're not getting anywhere. And please remember what I'm saying repeatedly about understanding numbers. And one of the greatest administrators of this country, a collector in Pudukkottai in the early 90s, told me of her experience. She was a very tough collector. In the animal and livestock census, where they got all the numbers and made asses of themselves, she called all the employees, those little clerks and everybody who does the survey, and told them, here is the livestock census, animal livestock. Gave them all sheets. This is Pudukkottai in the arid southern Tamil Nadu region of Tamil Nadu. Then it was too complex, and then they all came back and it was not filled out properly. She threw the file at them and said, get out of here, and I'm giving you 3 weeks to get back to me with all the numbers. Any column left blank, you're dead. Or whatever threat she made. So a little later they all came back with all the columns filled. Everything was done. And she found that there were 768 camels in Pudukkottai. And an innumerable number of other animals the district had never seen. So she called these guys back and said, what the heck have you done? And they said, madam, you only said don't leave any column blank. Okay, this is, in an arbitrary society, the collection of data will be arbitrary. And the data collected but you got to teach this to the experts, right? See, and have you ever heard of the think tank economist driving down the countryside in his SUV? Let's have SUVs back. He's driving down, he's going for a party with all his friends, weekend party with his friends. And he has to take something there for the party. So he sees, on a lonely stretch of road, he sees a shepherd with his big dog and hundreds of sheep. He decides to have fun at that guy's expense and get a sheep for the party. So he gets down from his SUV, goes to the shepherd and says, I'll bet you $100 against one of your sheep. Understand the picture. This is a very lonely landscape. Sheep are spread all over the place. All that you can see, as far as the eye can see, living creatures are the shepherd, his dog, and the sheep. I bet you $100 against one of your sheep that I guess the correct number of your flock. The shepherd thinks, nah, he can't do that. He can't do that because there are some sheep behind the rocks, there are some sheep behind the lake, there are some sheep behind those trees. He says, okay, you're on. And the economist at once says 973. The shepherd is shattered because the number is right. The number is correct. But the shepherd, being an honest guy, grudgingly says, oh damn it, shit. Take a sheep and go. So the very proud, smug, think tank intellectual economist picks up an animal and starts walking off to his car. Then the shepherd says, hey, how about it's customary for you to offer me a double or nothing on my bet so that I have a chance to win back. So this guy is getting impatient, still clutching his prized animal. He's about to get into the SUV. He says, okay, what do you want? Shepherd says, guess you double or nothing, bet you double or nothing, I'll guess your exact profession and occupation. And this guy says, nah, this little rural yokel, he can't do that. So he says, you're on. And the shepherd says, you're an economist with a prestigious think tank in the city. It's the economist's turn to be shattered. He says, how the hell did you know that? The shepherd says, well, put my dog down and I'll tell you. Yeah. So, that's with the numbers. Last, the protest. I have never, in all my years of being active as a journalist and before that as a student activist, I have never seen an atmosphere of repression and fear as serious as I see it in the last 3 years. I was a student union leader during the emergency. But down south, we didn't suffer much. We all had, of course, the arrest and the logging in at the police station, all that kind of crap had to be done. But we were privileged children from privileged caste and class backgrounds. Nothing much happened to us. Things were happening up north that were terrible. Terrible. You know what, guys? Here is something that you should know. The struggles and protests and the struggles for justice of the 60s, 70s and 80s were led by people who did not suffer. Were led by people like you, identifying themselves with the oppressed, identifying themselves with those denied justice. Some of the greatest names of activists you have today came out of your college, came out of the universities, but identified with laborers, with farmers, with workers, with Adivasis, with Dalits. It's a very important point that the protests and the struggles for justice of the 60s, 70s, 80s were often led by people who who did not suffer oppression or justice, or lack of justice. Why did they participate? Why did they reach out? Why did they bond with fellow citizens outside their caste group, outside their class group, outside the world and universe that they lived in? In my students' union, we had trouble, but looking at what my colleagues in the north went through, we did not suffer at all. But you know what? We did not suffer. But it mattered to us that others did. Because the word justice meant something to everyone, not just those denied it. It meant something to everyone, not just those denied it. That came out of your freedom struggle. That came out of the ideals of the freedom struggle. Don't have discussions about the idea of nation and descent without knowing where those values in your constitution came from. They came from the sacrifices of hundreds of millions of human beings to give you the space where you and I can be sitting and talking and criticizing the Prime Minister and everything else today. Yeah. it, I repeat, justice meant something to everyone, not just those denied it. It meant a great deal. And we need to recapture that. There are incredible protests taking place across this country. Many of them you would never have heard of. They're not reported by a media that is completely corporatized and completely identifies itself with the ruling class and the ruling elite. Understand this, all the privatizations that take place in this country, the biggest beneficiaries are your media owners. If tomorrow the spectrum is privatized, who are the beneficiaries? Tata, Birlas, Ambanis, all major players in the spectrum. Because that's who owns the media. If mining is privatized fully, if all the mines are privatized fully, who are the beneficiaries? Tata, Birla, Ambanis, Adanis, all major media owners. Yeah? Whereas our connection, our bonding with those groups that were involved in struggle, advanced capitalism has atomized, heterogenized us. We're not even looking at them. We're not looking at what's happening to them. Occasionally you hear of them from a lecture from me, but we are not connecting with them, nor seriously seeking to do so. The big feature of the last 25 years, and I don't say it's just this government, successive governments, has been the criminalization of dissent. Making protest criminal. You've seen it applied to you. You've seen it applied to the struggles in JNU, BHU, FTII, Shantiniketan, elsewhere. I see it happening to farmers protesting against the taking away of their land. I've seen Adivasis in Kalinga Nagar, Odisha, who never entered a police station in their lives until they refused to part with their land for a SEZ. Now, husband and wife have 91 criminal cases against them. In Srikakulam, in the protest against the land acquisition for the port, a 78-year-old lady who weighs 35 kgs and is about this much has cases of attempted murder, attempting to murder a police party. She'll fall down if you blow hard on her. This is the criminalization of protest, the criminalization of dissent that you need to think. This is the way in which protest is unfolding. But you know what I'm proud of and what I think is fantastic? The struggles, the protests against injustice, the protests and the fights for freedom of expression have been coming from the writers, artists, poets, and students of this country. It's not come from the generation you called here as panelists. It's come from you guys. The students of Film and Television Institute who for 105 days fought that Mahayuddha to keep Yudhishthira out. The students of JNU, the artists who returned their state Sahitya Academy Awards, try understanding. You're a small poet or writer sitting in a small part of Raichur or Gulbarga. That national award is the biggest thing that ever happened in your life. For you to give it back or throw it at, it calls for courage of a kind I do not have. By the way, I never had to return any award because I have never ever accepted a government award. So I didn't have any problems. But I recognize how important those awards are to those people who have returned them. They did it. They did it for you. When the students of BHU, JNU, FTI are fighting, it's for all of us. So I see that. And it's the kind of, and don't shy away from the politics of it. Don't shy away. Here's a generation that's been socialized, told by its leader. Politics, every day on television, politics is a bad word. Mint, Indian Express covered the budget saying, economics mixed with politics. Mint says politics, politics, politics. It's not a bad word. There is bad politics and there is good politics. Right? There's bad language and there's good language. I want to tell you guys in 1 minute about something that will give you a connection, at least while you are still students. And it's called the People's Archive of Rural India. You can pick up bookmarks from right here somewhere. There are bookmarks. We are publishing in 13 languages. Many of those journalists writing for us are your age group. They are contributing. They get out into the countryside. Our fellows are stationed in the countryside for at least 3 months in a region. India has 95 regions. They write from there. Increasingly, we are not just writing about Adivasis and Dalits, but Adivasis and Dalits are writing for us. Through their own eyes. We have a bunch of photo essays done by Adivasi and OBC women in the Bandipur forest. People who don't own cell cameras, with a small camera given to them, have taken some gorgeous photographs of the Bandipur forest. Please visit the People's Archive of Rural India. You can contact me through that also and do it. In parting, I say once again, don't be afraid of politics. Running away from it allows the triumph of the bad. When I entered university 40 years ago, there was a beautiful, beautiful poster on the gate. I have not forgotten that poster, nor failed to live by it. It said, when politics decided that you would come to this university, when politics decides whether you go to university or not, when politics decides which university you go to, when politics decides who will teach you and what they will teach you, when politics decides whether you will get a job when you leave this place, when politics decides all these things, decide what your politics will be. Thank you. Thank you.